Hello everyone and welcome to this another episode of 3D prototyping in Unity. My name is Kasanas. In the last episode we took care of our dynamic camera. The camera now follows the character along, maintaining the character in the center of the screen more or less. There's a slight follow, a slight smoothing in, but more or less the character will stay in the center of the screen. And that's exactly how we wanted our camera to work for this game. So that's great. In today's episode we're moving on to one of our first big special effects. And this series is based on two courses I'm teaching at George Brown. The first one is procedural animation and the second one is special effects. And this is my first big special effect, really. We're going to be building today a prefab for the light machine gun that our character is carrying around. And we're going to be building a special projectile, as well as what I'm going to be calling the gun muzzle or something like that. That's going to define how this weapon works. And the awesome thing about it is we'll be able to take and swap out the projectile we create or the gun muzzle we create, and we can have a brand new weapon. All right, we're going to be able to make several different weapons really easily here. Changing up just a few variables. So that's my big plan for this. We're going to be using something called a line renderer to create the bullet itself. We'll also be looking at things like bullet impact and muzzle flash and that kind of thing in today's episode. Like I said, it'll be two episodes though, one where we build all the assets and the second one where we actually do the code. So let's get started. Okay, currently this weapon is just sitting in the hands of our player, and we put it in, let's drill down into the character here. We put it in way down into one of the actual hands of the character, the right hand of the character. So I'm going to drill all the way down here, all the way down, and actually find where we put our assault rifle. Okay, there it is right there. Here's our assault rifle. Right now, let's rename this right away, because I don't know why it's still called New Bone. I should have renamed that. Let's call this thing here let's just call it LMG. It doesn't really matter what we call it. LMG. All right, I don't want it to be called New Bone. That really bothered me. Anyway, so right now this object is broken up into the assault rifle, the top level of the assault rifle itself, which we use to position and put into the character's hand, and we use the LMG itself to really position it in the character's hand so it matched with the animation. Other than that, though, this weapon just kind of follows along with the character, and we don't really want that to be the case. We want this weapon to be functional. In fact, we want it's right now it's just a graphic, and ultimately that's all it's ever going to be. We should be able to put any model in here and have our actual weapons continue to work. And that's what I want to do. That's my big plan. So what I want to start off with right away is I'm going to start off by clicking on LMG, and actually, no, I'm going to click on the main level. I'm going to click on the assault rifle itself. So on the top level, on the root of it, I'm going to click on the assault rifle, and I'm going to say create, and I'm going to say empty child. All right, I'm going to make sure it's all zeroed out, which it is. And I'm going to name this thing right away to gun muzzle. Now, the gun muzzle itself is going to be used, let's change this right away to this as well. We'll change it to, let's make it green as well. Boom, green. The gun muzzle itself is going to be used to determine where the bullet is coming out of. So right now it's back on the zero position of the actual rifle, and we don't want to do that. We want to move it so that, I'm pushing the wrong button here. We want to move it so that it is at the end of the rifle itself. Right up here in the end of the rifle itself. And that way, when this actual weapon fires, the bullet's coming out of the right location. So I'm just going to take it, I'm going to drag it, and drag it kind of up like that. Let me look at it in 2D to make sure that I've got it lined up nice. Ooh, too close. Let me focus on that. Focus. Move in a bit. All right. I just want to make sure that it's right at the tip of the rifle, and it looks pretty good. It looks pretty good. I'm going to move it up a little tiny bit. We can always adjust this later on. This is basically where our bullet's going to be coming out of. We're going to be writing code in here later on. We're going to write a script in here later on that is going to take care of actually firing the weapon itself. And that way, we'll be able to simply take this gun muzzle out, replace it with a different gun muzzle to make a brand new weapon. Or we can simply replace the model and change a few things around within the gun muzzle itself and make a brand new weapon. Okay, that's the first thing I wanted to do. Let me just check this in 3D space to make sure in 3D space. Yes, he wasn't lined up right. It wasn't lined up right. Right about there. All right, yeah, right about there. Now, we're going to make adjustments to this later on, so I'm not going to keep playing with that right now. That's the first step. The gun muzzle is just a holder. We're going to be writing code in here in a little bit, in the next episode, actually, that's going to fire off this weapon. Okay, great. Now, the next step is to actually create a projectile. Now, there are a number of things that we want an actual projectile to do. We want it to be in control of everything about this weapon. I want everything to occur within the projectile itself. It's going to be a prefab that we create so we can use it over and over and over again. And I want this projectile to be the graphic that shows the bullet. I want it to be the muzzle flash itself, the actual fire spitting out of the front of the muzzle. I want it to be the bullet impact. I want it to have a bunch of different stuff associated with it. The light source as the thing blinks on and off. And that way, whenever we're calling from our muzzle, our gun muzzle, whenever we're instantiating, which means to create, like live creation, of a prefab, whenever we instantiate this prefab, it takes care of everything. And then simply by swapping out the projectile for another one, we've got a brand new weapon. Now, let's start creating our projectile right now. I'm going to get out of this player. I'll go up here to soldier for now. And right now I'm just going to say create, and I'm going to say create empty. And I'm going to rename this thing. Well, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to zero it out. So I'm going to reset it. The first thing I'm going to do is rename it. And I'm going to call this thing here bullet. All right, this is a machine gun and it fires bullets, but you could just as easily make a laser or anything else that you want out of this. And it's going to have a number of things associated with it. So first of all, we've got ourselves a transform, and that's great. The next thing I want to add is something called a line renderer. And if you don't know where it is, you can simply start typing line, and it's going to find it for you. So I'm going to choose the line renderer right there. The line renderer its job is basically to draw a line, exactly as the name implies. It's to draw a line, and that line is going to have a particular material associated with it. Right now, it's just simply a purple color. It's going to have a particular material associated with it, and it's going to be drawn from one location to the next. And right now, I'm not going to worry a whole lot about it. We're going to make a couple of small changes to this actual line renderer, but a lot of the changes are going to be done in code. Okay, so let's start off right away. We can ignore almost everything here. We're going to actually change out we're end up going to be changing out the material itself. So let's go through right now and create a brand new material. Right now, it's this kind of ugly purple color, and that's not what we want at all. We don't want it to be an ugly purple color. We want it to look like some kind of bullet, okay? Like a line, basically. A bullet line. And we're going to go right now let's go into our materials. And let's create a brand new material. So I'm going to go into create. I'm going to say material. Let me just find it here. Material right there. And let's call this one here. Let's call this material bullet shader. It doesn't really matter what you call it. I'm going to call it bullet shader. And I'm going to keep it really, really simple. Now, first of all, I'm not going to leave it as the standard shader. We looked at the standard shader earlier and how well it works, but I don't want to worry about lighting. I want this bullet line to be glowing, like it's kind of like, like superheated air or something like that. So I'm going to change this right away from the standard to something like an unlit color. An unlit color. That's all I really need. I'm going to change the main color right now to something yellowish, a bright yellow of some kind, way up here in the corner. And I can always change this later on if I decide I want to look a little more yellow, a little brighter. I know that's too green, obviously. Too green. All right, that's still too green. Too green. All right, let's leave it like that. Let's not keep picking on the color right here. Okay, we're going to leave it like that. That's our bullet shader, and all it is a yellow unlit color shader, okay? Unlit color material. Now I'm going to go on back to my actual bullet right here, and I'm going to change out the material from what it was to this bullet shader. Bam, bam. You could put in some kind of gradient there if you want it to like fade off, or you could do something like that. I'm not going to do anything really fancy. I'm just going to do a nice bright yellow like that. All right. So that changed my actual material from that purplish color to this yellow, which is great. All right. The only other thing I really need to do in this line renderer is I want to change a couple of the parameters. You can see how thick it is right now, and if I change the start width to, let's say, 0.025, let's say, I'm going to make it really, really skinny. And the end width is going to be 0.025 as well. So right now we can't even really see it down there. It's just a really, really, really skinny line. You could make this bigger if you wanted to. You can make it, so you could see it. You want these both to be approximately the same size though. You want them both to be the same size. That's going to be too thick. That's not being really thick. You want these things to be actually the same size. If not, you're going to end up with a wider at one end and skinnier at the other. My original values that I used in the original game was 0.025 and 0.025. I just expanded there so you could see that it was still there. All right. And that's all we really need to do with that line renderer itself. That's all we really need to do. The line renderer is going to be sitting there and available to us when we actually put our bullet in place. And we're going to stretch the length of the line itself so that it goes from one end, from the gun itself to whatever it hits. But right now we're not going to do anything else with it. We're just going to leave it right there. All right. The next thing we're going to take a look at is creating a muzzle flash from a particle system. Okay, so we're going to take a look at the muzzle flash right now, and really this is our first look at particles, so we're going to take it a little bit easy, and we're going to use a lot of the default stuff rather than getting into the nitty-gritty of the actual particle system. We'll take a look at how to build a particle system and to make it do what we want, but it's not going to be anything super fancy for this time through. And obviously, this being a special effects course, we will end up doing a lot of fancier particle systems. Okay, so to start off with, what we want to do is we want to simply add a component. There's several different ways to create a particle system. You can add a component and build a particle system directly onto an existing object, or you can build a particle system on its own as its own game object kind of thing and add it on. In our case, what I want to do is I actually want to add a component, all right? And to find it, it's under Effects, and you're looking for Particle System. Bam! And that will create the default particle system. Let me scroll down so you can see it. Right there. That will create the default particle system using the default particle materials. Okay, and the default particle materials are these kind of blobby yellow things. And we'll go through and we'll look at what each of these things mean. Right now, the particle system itself is broken up into several different categories. So there's the general categories of how the thing is starting off and the main attributes of the particle system. And below that, we've got several different categories: emission, shape, velocity, etc., etc. We're not going to be taking a look at all of these today, only a handful of them in the basic particles. We'll start off with the renderer. So first of all, the renderer itself determines what is being used, what's showing up, what kind of particles are actually showing up. And as I mentioned earlier, these are the default particle material. And we could go through and actually create some kind of special material if we want to, but for now, I think I'm just going to use our bullet shader. That's going to work fine. So I'm going to change it up. I'm going to look in here for our bullet. Right there, bam, bam. And you can immediately see that I've replaced the default blobby particles with squares that are colored in our shader, which is great. That's perfect so far. Now, above that is the render mode, and render mode is, let me twist this around so you can see. If I actually twist this around, you can see that my particles are always facing the camera. Okay, and that's what billboard means. We have several different options for the render mode: billboard, stretch billboard, horizontal billboard, vertical billboard, and mesh. The stretch billboard is exactly like the billboard. It's always facing the camera, but it is stretched out. All right, it's stretched along its direction of travel. Horizontal means it's always facing in the horizontal direction. Vertical is always facing vertical. And mesh means you can include some kind of mesh onto your particle itself. I could put a cube in there, I could put a head in there, I could put a car in there, anything I want, and have everything shooting out. All right. In our case, we're going to use stretched billboard. And you can see that the real difference between billboard and stretched billboard is simply the fact that these are actually stretched out. All right. The particles themselves are still always facing towards our camera. So that's great. We can ignore the renderer from here on in. Now let's go to the top and take a look. At the top is some general attributes that we can take a look at. The duration is how long this actual loop took place, or how long these things actually take place. And in our case, we're going to want a really short duration. 1 is what we're going to be using for now. And 1 is basically is how long before the loop begins again. Okay. Below that is looping. If we turn looping off, it plays once and that's it. If we turn looping on, it continues to play over and over again. Pre-warm. Let's take a look. If I hit play right now, we're going to see that our particles came into existence and they flew away. Okay, they flew away. If, however, I instead turn pre-warm on, we'll have several particles already in existence. All right, you can see that they're already out there. They're already moving along. So pre-warm basically means don't start the particle system now. Pretend that it's been running for a long time. And we want to turn both looping. Well, I'm going to leave looping on for now, but we're going to turn pre-warm off for now. Start delay, how much time before it actually starts up. Lifetime is how long these things will live. Start speed, how fast they're going. Start size, how big they are. Start rotation, how much it's rotated. Color itself, you can change to give a tint or whatever to these colors. Gravity modifier will allow you to actually have gravity affect your particles, so they'll fall down. If you were creating, let's say, a waterfall or something like that, your gravity could be pulled down on the actual particles. Inherent velocity, etc., etc., etc. Now, and play on awake, we're gonna turn off. ultimately. Now, oh no, we're going to leave it on, sorry, play and awake. So play and awake basically means as soon as it starts, start up your particles as soon as this thing comes into existence. We're going to make a couple of changes right away to our actual particles. First of all, the duration of 1 is great. That's what we're looking for. I already changed that. 0 for our start delay. You'll notice along here, right now we've got a value of 5, but if you go to the end right here, we have the option to have several different things. So right now we've got one constant value, 5, for the start life. If I want to, I can say, let's put random between 2 constants, so we have some variation. So sometimes these things will live for 0, and sometimes they will live for 5 seconds. Now, let's say I want to change this to 0.1, because this is going to be a muzzle flash, just a very, very brief boom, right? And that's it. It's just going to flash once and then turn off. So I actually want to change my start lifetime to a value between 0 and 0.1. And that's going to really allow us to have varying amounts of speed and distance that's traveled. All right? Same thing with our start speed. Let's vary that up a little bit. Let's go in here and say random between 2 constants and between 0 and, let's say, 6. All right? We're not seeing a whole lot of difference right now because the particles themselves are so large. And we're going to change that right now as well. Let's make our start size a random number between... let's say, oops, that's the wrong one. Let's say 0.1. No, sorry, 0.01 and 0.05. So right now, let's kind of put this up so we can see a little better here. Right now, we're kind of getting this kind of flash. Now it's really, really big. It's still not exactly what we want. So let's go down a little bit and take a look at the shape node. All right, let's scroll down here and take a look at this shape node. Now the shape itself, we have several different options for shape. Right now it's set up as a cone, and that's what we're ultimately going to want to use. But you have several different options. There's a sphere, which means blow it in all directions, kind of like a firecracker going off or a firework going off. Hemisphere only blows outwards in whatever direction around the sphere itself. Cone, box, mesh, you can take a look at all these different ones. You guys can kind of go through and look at them yourselves. I'm going to leave it as cone. Now, oops, I didn't mean to push that. That said, what we are going to do is we're going to change a lot of different things here. We're going to really narrow up our cone angle. All right, right now it's a very large angle and it's a very, very large radius. Our radius we want to be very small. Let's make our radius 0.06. All right, so that's a little better. So right now we've got ourselves a very, very narrow radius, and we're going to change our angle to something very skinny. Somewhere around there. That's not so bad. 7.6 or 7.72. That's not so bad. You know what? We're going to make it 7.62 because that is the size of a NATO round. So we'll make it that. A little information for you there. All right, so 7.62. It doesn't really matter what you choose. Now you can see I'm kind of getting that flash coming out. Now we can vary this up a little more if we really wanted to. There's one last thing that I want to do. I'm going to change the emission. All right. For our first particle system, I'm going to change this emission. Now, currently, we have a maximum number of particles on the screen coming from this thing of 1,000, and we have an emission rate of 10. So 10 particles are coming out at a time. Okay, and I don't want to change. I don't want to use this number. I can increase this and say, like 100, and obviously we're going to get far more particles, and that works perfectly fine as well. But I don't want to do that. What I want to do instead, I'm going to remove this value, and I'm going to set my actual rate to 0. All right, so there are 0 particles coming out over time. What I want to do instead is I want to add a burst effect with this little plus sign right here. And that's pretty good. I'm going to set it up so there's 30 particles coming out at time 0. So bam, I'm getting this thing here coming out like that. All right? And that is going to be that is how I'm going to set up my actual muzzle flash as far as the particles themselves are concerned. I don't think I need to do anything else right now. I'm just going to leave it like that. All right? So with that said, there's one last thing that I want to add on to our actual system here, and that's a light. And actually, before I forget, I also want to make sure that I've turned off my looping. Let's turn off the looping because I don't want this thing to actually loop. Let me turn it off right here. I only want it to play once. That's the ultimate goal, is to have this thing actually just play once. So it's going to flash once, and then it's going to be done. So if we do play right now, watch what happens. Play. It's so fast we didn't even see it. Anyway, we got one muzzle flash going off, and we're going to see it a lot better once we actually start setting up this game. The last thing that I want to add, like I said, is a light. All right. So right now we've got ourselves our particle system. We've got ourselves our line renderer. The last thing I want to add is to add a light component to this. And the light component is going to be one of the standard lights, just one of the, well, let's just add it instead of me talking about it. Light, let's go to light, let's look it up. Light, bam. It's going to be basically a point light is what I want to add. And I want to make sure that everything is where I want it to be. Now, you can see this entire area shows how big the actual light's going to be. And I don't want it to be that big at all. I want it to be much, much smaller. I want it to be, only have a very small range. So let's say a range of 1. All right, so let's zoom in there now. So that range is still big enough. We can see it's still going to be big enough to allow us to light up the actual character, but not so big as to light up a whole bunch of our surrounding area. And that's supposed to be the light as the bullet itself comes out of the muzzle of the weapon. And we're going to leave everything else. So right now we're going to leave the point. Real time is fine. The range is fine. The intensity, let's turn up the intensity a little bit. Let's make it 3. That's going to give it a higher intensity around the actual object itself. Bounce intensity is perfectly fine. No shadows is great. That's fine. There's a couple other things I want to do. I want to change the color itself, and I'm going to try and get something that closely matches our yellow. So we're going to kind of get like a yellowish flash on the actual character. Boom, right there. We're going to get a yellow flash on the character when this weapon goes off. All right, and that's all we really need to do as far as building this actual bullet is concerned. Close this. As far as that's concerned, let's put this back to 0 now. Let's put this back to 0 and 0. All right, so later on, what our plan is to instantiate this bullet on the actual gun muzzle, and it's going to take care of everything from there. All right, guys, that's all we need to do as far as this asset's concerned. Well, no, one last thing, I'm lying. I want to build a prefab out of it. And it's not quite done yet because we haven't actually added our code in that's going to control everything. But I want to grab this bullet, I'm going to drag it, I'm going to drop it in my prefabs, and bam, I've got the bullet right there. So later on, I can go through and I can actually go through and build this bullet. Now, I'm going to delete it out of here. Now that I've got a prefab in place, I'm just going to delete it out of there. All right, everyone. In the next episode, we're going to take a look at code. All right? It's going to take us through to actually going through and building the actual code in order to create this weapon and make it work. All right, everybody, I hope you enjoyed that episode. I hope you are following along. And if you are, great. I can't wait to see what you're doing. I'm really looking forward to it. If you're not, then come on, start at the beginning and follow along. Build yourself a game and show me what it looks like when you're done. All right, everyone, thumbs up, thumbs down, comments down below. And if you haven't done so, please take a few seconds to subscribe. Have yourselves a wonderful day, everyone.